gentlemen, boys and girls, I want to welcome you back to the Exceptional Conservative Show live from the nation's capital. What a tremendous joy it is to have this acclaimed scholar in our midst, none other than James M. Simpson with us tonight. We are talking about Black Lives Matter, and to put it into the context, hashtag Black Lives Matter, the Revolutionaries of America's new Communist Manifesto. James Simpson, who is an author of the Red Green Axis 2.0. You can find him on Twitter at James M. Simpson. And tonight, sir, a lot of people have this idea, this great fanciful idea, that race and blacks were always considered a part of the Marxist movement in America. And for some odd reason, a lot of people have this idea that it was W.E.B. Du Bois and the Marxists who were looking out for the best interests of Black America. If you would, if you could shine a light here, historically, why did the Marxists want blacks to be involved in their movement?
Oh, well, I mean, that's actually quite straightforward. You know, first of all, the communists, the Soviets, the communist Chinese, all the communist nations of the world, their primary military manual is Sun Tzu's Art of War.
Yes.
Sun Tzu's Art of War teaches you how to defeat your enemy without firing a shot. And it's done through disinformation, through subversion, through taking all the resources of your enemy and using them for yourself. And they always seek to inflame tensions that exist or have historically existed in whatever country they're targeting. And I mean, that's how the Baathists, who were actually Stalinist communists, took over Syria. They exploited the division between the majority Sunni Muslims who lived in Syria and the minority Alawite the other sect of Islam.
Yes.
It's escaping right the Iranian version of Islam.
The Shia.
And the Shia. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Having a old age moment.
And I feel you.
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing that they're doing here. They exploit divisions. First they create divisions, and then they rub salt in the wound. And they've done that, you know, the big part was with the blacks because, of course, there's the history of slavery. And then they've done it with every other minority group in the country. And they do it between straight and gay, lesbian, etc. They find points where they can inflame differences and balkanize our country. And, you know, you talked about W.E.B. Du Bois. I think there are basically two, there's a lot more, of course, but there are two of the biggest influencers in black culture in American history. There's W.E.B. Du Bois, and then there is Booker T. Washington. And Booker T. had it exactly right. You know, when slavery was abolished, he began training blacks so that they could prosper and so that they could grow and develop and become full Americans and pursue and achieve the American dream. And he was applauded all over the country by whites, they thought he was doing a great job. Now, but what happened was in the 20s, when Du Bois came along, the communists saw, no. We don't want them to advance. We don't want blacks to have the good life here in America. We want to inflame those differences. And they set about doing that. And of course, they did it through culture and especially through education, where, I don't think these days, if you go to a public school in an inner city community, anybody could even tell you who Booker T. Washington was. But he was a guy who approached it from a Christian standpoint, and he approached it from the notion that if blacks were going to advance, they were going to have to lift themselves out, and they got much help from whites who championed his cause. But he was very clear on that they were going to need to get trained, they were going to need to get educated, and of course he started the Tuskegee Institute, and he did wonderful things. But the left doesn't want that to happen. The left wants to keep blacks down, impoverished, and angry. And they say it. And Cloward and Piven, who I've written extensively about, were the most famous of these when they came up with the crisis strategy to overwhelm our government with demands for services, starting with welfare. And the purpose was not to get blacks welfare, blacks who needed it welfare. The goal was to get everybody in the black community on welfare to the point where the whole system would collapse, and in that collapse they could start a revolution, because suddenly these people who had become dependent on welfare were no longer getting it. And they say this explicitly, and most people don't know that their model was the inspiration of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society program. And in presenting that to his fellow Democrat cronies, he said, we will have those blacks voting for us for the next 200 years, although he didn't use the word blacks.
Exactly.
And and that's been the agenda ever since. They want to inflame differences. And Nalini Stamp, who is the person who started the whole hands up, don't shoot movement, she was an Occupy Wall Street person. She was a member of Acorn. She's a prominent leftist. And she said, what we're really trying to do here is get rid of the capitalist system because it's not working for us anymore. I mean, this is just straight out of the communist handbook.
And it's no different than what W.E.B. Du Bois said after leaving the NAACP in the 1930s. That I'm leaving because you all are trying to use capitalism, and I'm not for that anymore. I don't believe that capitalism works for our people.
He never did.
These individuals are not interested in liberating people or giving them more freedoms and more strength. They're actually trying to destroy our nation. And in addition to that, W.E.B. Du Bois was probably one of the first big recruiters of Marxism in our country during the 20s and 30s. Because until that time period, it was a very rare thing, a truly rare thing, to find a black person who indulged themselves in socialism and communism.
And most blacks were Republicans.
Exactly. It was uncalled for, unknown. You speak of, in your writing, Reds Exploiting Blacks, the Roots of Black Lives Matter. You speak of the leftist origins, and you speak of the fact that the radical leftist activists Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi claim credit for the slogan and the hashtag. However, they really can't, because of their past work with other radical groups, and that those radical groups are funded by capitalist organizations of today. Can you talk about some of the capitalist groups that support those radical left activists?
Well, the article that I wrote, all three of them worked for organizations that were part of the network of Freedom Road Socialist Organization. All nonprofits, and I don't have that in front of me, but uh,
Yeah.
they these were all tax exempt organizations, and they were directors of those organizations, and all of those
And
organizations got money from, they get money from Vanguard Fund, they get money from a lot of money from George Soros Open Society Foundation, but they
mhm.
get money from most of the foundations, almost all of which today are controlled by hardcore leftists. For example, a few people know that the open borders agenda was essentially financed by the Ford Foundation. Ford
Mm.
Foundation has somewhere on the order of $12 billion dollars, or probably more at this point. Uh, and it funded all of the radical Latino organizations um, that pushed the open borders agenda and illegal immigration. And so there's a whole host. And if your viewers look up that article, uh, I list the
Exactly.
various
Ben and
organizations.
Jerry's, Ben and Jerry's, Ford,
Yep,
Kellogg,
there you
Nathan
go.
Cummins, the Rockefellers, Soros
Yep,
Funds,
yep,
California Wellness,
yep,
Public Welfare, Robert Wood
yep,
Johnson Organization,
yep.
Margarita
Joe Biden.
Casey. These are large institutions
Huge.
that don't find it a problem whatsoever delivering these particular groups monies.
Yep.
And what I failed to see is why would a capitalist organization want to fund these particular groups?
Well, these foundations, uh, that's another aspect of the strategy. As I said
Mm-hmm.
earlier, take the money from the enemy and use it for your own causes. And so, as far back as the 50s, all of those large foundations that were created by capitalists like the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, all those organizations. Uh, uh, Welch's grape juice is a big one. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
they all were infiltrated, their boards were infiltrated by radical leftists. And the radical leftists, through the family members that founded those organizations for genuinely, um, for genuine um, humanitarian purposes, and turned it to be vehicles for funding the radical left. And that started in the 50s, and it's been
Wow.
going on ever since. And so, I mean, I think it was Edsel Ford, who was on the board of the Ford Foundation. They threw him out. They said, "You're fired." They had taken over a majority, and they voted to throw him out, and they threw him out of his own foundation, and he left screaming at them. But they didn't
Wow.
care because they had gotten what they wanted. And that's the way it is with so many of these. There's Reynolds Tobacco, Reynolds Aluminum, all these big companies. Their founders, their families create these foundations, and then the foundations get taken over by radical leftists. And a lot of times, the offspring of these capitalists, are they suffer from white guilt. they,
Yes.
they never earned a penny in their life, and they think they're going to become cool by funding all these left wing operations. And of course, they get lionized at wine and cheese parties and told how great they are. And they all fall in with this whole leftist agenda. They think that's what they're supposed to do. They're ashamed that they have all this money. And, they shouldn't be. Uh, those capitalists helped build this country into what it is.
James, there are some people that would sit back and say that you have white privilege. Um, and and congratulations on your white privilege. That must make you a multi-billionaire. But what exactly is white privilege, and why did they create that term? Why did the communists create that terminology?
Yeah. Well, it was first articulated in a pamphlet put out by a guy named Noel Ignatiev, who was a member of the Provisional Organizing Committee of the Communist Party USA, which was the most hardcore left-wing Stalinist branch of the Communist Party,
Wow.
and another guy, another radical named Ted Stevens. They were both members of Students for a Democratic Society, which of course was all led by red diaper babies, the offspring of 50s communists. And he created this pamphlet called White Skin Privilege. And the idea was, once again, to, to sow division uh, from different groups by making it look as though we had some kind of special privilege in this country and that we don't deserve it and that it should be taken away. And you know, the thing is, they talk about white privilege, they talk about white supremacy and white nationalism. Everything is always talked about in racial terms. But if you question them closely, they'll tell you, well, you don't have to be white to be white. All you have to do is believe in capitalism and the Constitution and the American way. And then you are a white supremacist because you have taken on the same ideologies, beliefs of the people who founded this country. And so you're just as guilty. You know,
I
you're
want to
just as
ask you
guilty.
here in closing, because we're going to run out of time, and I really appreciate the fact that you're here tonight to talk about these particular things. I'm
Sure.
going to have you come back in the next couple of weeks because you're an authority on these particular issues. Um, but there are two actual questions. One is about critical theory.
Yeah.
What exactly is critical race theory, and how does that apply to the use by Marxists? And then, lastly, when the Marxists finally come to power, what will they do with the black race?
Pardon me?
When the Marxists finally come to power, what will they do with the black race?
Well, I think that follows a trend line. I think when they first take over, they will use blacks and other minorities as their street army,
Mm-hmm.
uh, as their enforcers, as their Red Brigade, because they have been able to inflame tensions and hatred enough. And the media has enabled this by lying about our history, lying about what we are as a nation, deliberately misdirecting and misrepresenting everything about our country. And so these people will feel justified in whatever kind of terrorist activities they engage in. And we already have seen a very big example over the last week or so with all of these riots. These people will kill people. And so that's what you will get at first. But after a while, if you don't serve any useful purpose, guess where you're going to go? On the ash heap of history along with us. You're not going to survive either. And, you know, I'll tell you, the whole critical race theory, Marx said before he wrote the Communist Manifesto, he said, we want to engage in a ruthless criticism of everything existing. And everything meant everything in Western society. That was all he was concerned about. And because that was the enemy, capitalism was the enemy. And in the 1930s, a school was created in Frankfurt, Germany, called the School of Social Research,
Mm-hmm.
and they were forced to flee when Hitler took over, and they were relocated at Columbia Teachers College in New York, became
Wow.
known as the Frankfurt School, and they created something called critical theory, based on Marx's admonition to criticize everything existing. And so all of the political correctness, all of what we call now cultural Marxism, which tears down every aspect of our society, everything you see people screaming in the streets now, that comes right out of critical theory. The idea is to discredit a Western civilization, discredit capitalism, discredit Christianity in order to pave the way for world communism. And critical race theory was just an offshoot of critical theory, and its most famous champion was Derek Bell, who
Yeah.
was a Harvard professor who was one of Obama's favorite teachers. So yeah, that's where that comes. And now
And
there's critical pedagogy. There's dozens of different critical theories, but it's
James,
all targeted to destroy us.
I'm sorry. I wish you could say a little bit longer, but very quick question for you here. Um, there's a country to the south of us called Guyana, and it's the only English-speaking country there, and it is a socialist haven that's been turning into a Marxist haven. And
Right.
they recently had an election where it's taken them 4 weeks to determine who their president is going to be, because that's how long it takes to count fraudulent ballots. Um, but I've gotten into debate with individuals there who state, well, actually individuals that live here in a capitalist nation where they make a ton of money and they're happy and they're doing well, but they say that Guyana should remain a Marxist country to redistribute wealth. China has come in and given them $50 billion to build roads throughout Guyana into Brazil. I have to ask you
Yeah.
here, sir, is there a weakness in them being a Marxist country, and is China giving them $50 billion for nothing?
Oh, right, right. China is buying them out, is what China is doing. China is providing a pretext to bring a lot of Chinese in there and basically take over and make sure that it remains not only a hardcore communist country, but a communist country that can be used as a launching base for attacks against the United States.
There you go,
And they're doing
Guyana.
that all over the world.
Thank you. I'm going to have you come back. We're going to talk about the Silk Road experiment and how that's not, it's not a gift. It's a Trojan horse to destroy our civilization. James, God bless you. Big mistake that they didn't pick you for Congress. And I hope to God that there is a place for you in our structure of governance somewhere around this country. God bless you, sir. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Ken, great to be with you again. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, James Simpson, I'm telling you, you have got to get his book. You can find it on Amazon, ladies and gentlemen, without a shadow of a doubt. He is a warrior, a patriot, and he's writing truth, especially for you people down in Guyana. You need to order his book. He is the author of the Red Green Axis 2.0. You will see that there is collusion between the Islamists and the Marxists, and that they will eventually have a battle over who will take control. But it's all built around installing communism around the world. What a great guest. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be back with more of the best in urban conservative talk. And I will also come back and tell you what our movies of the week will be. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we got some great movies coming up. Stay tuned.